Grebes and Divers, Penguins, and Tube-Nosed Birds by W. P. Pycraft. The Grebes and Divers. The grebes and divers are representatives of an exceedingly ancient type, and are in many ways besides very interesting. Both are common British birds. The greater part of their lives is spent upon the water, and to suit this aquatic existence, their bodies are specially modified. One of the principal features of this modification is seen in the position of the legs. These, by a shortening of the thigh bones in the grebes, leave the body so far back that when the bird walks, the body is held vertically. With the divers, walking has become an impossibility, and they can only move on land on their bellies, pushing themselves along with the feet. Both grebes and divers are expert swimmers, and dive with the greatest ease, remaining long underwater. The grebes haunt ponds, lakes, and broads. The divers prefer the open sea. Both feed on fish. Grebes. Of the numerous species of grebe, the most familiar are the great crested grebe and the little dabchick. The former has suffered grievous persecution for the sake of its beautiful breast feathers, which fashion decreed should be worn by the gentler sex in the form of muffs or hats. Thus a price was set upon the head of this beautiful and harmless bird, and its ranks were speedily thinned. Some species wear during the nesting season beautiful chestnut or golden ears, horns, or frills on the head and neck. The eared grebe is especially magnificent at this time. Divers. These, as already remarked, are sea-loving birds, but they breed inland on the shores of lakes. There are not many species of divers, but, like the grebes, they assume a special dress during the nesting season, more beautiful than the winter dress. The penguins. The penguins may justly be called wonderful birds, and they are undoubtedly of very ancient descent. For countless generations, the sea has been their home and refuge, and, in consequence, flight has been abandoned in exchange for increased swimming powers, which have been gained by transforming the wing into a paddle. This transformation has resulted in flattening the wing bones, and so increasing the surface of the hand and arm whilst reducing its thickness, and the suppression of the quill feathers. The result is a blade-like paddle closely resembling the paddle of the whale, the turtle, or the extinct fish lizards. With this organ, they cleave their way through the water, often far below the surface, in pursuit of food, just as of old their ancestors did through the air. In other diving birds, the wings are kept closely pressed to the side of the body when underwater, whilst locomotion is effected by the feet. The penguin's legs, in consequence of diminished use, have shortened considerably. But besides the wings and legs, the feathery covering has also undergone a certain amount of change. This has been effected by increasing the size of the shaft of the feather and diminishing the vane. As a result, on the front part of the wings, these feathers look more like scales than feathers. Professor Moseley has vividly described the appearance of a flock of penguins at sea. He writes from Tristan da Cunha, "As we approached the shore, I was astonished at seeing a shoal of what looked like extremely active, very small porpoises or dolphins. They showed black above and white beneath, and came along in a shoal of 50 or more. Towards the shore at a rapid pace by a series of successive leaps out of the water and leaps into it again. Splash, splash went this marvelous shoal of animals, till they went splash through the surf and onto the black, stony beach, and then struggled and jumped up amongst the boulders and revealed themselves as wet and dripping penguins." Like their relatives in other parts of the world, penguins breed in huge communities known as rookeries, a rookery being peopled by tens of thousands. Their nests, made of small stones, are placed among the tall grass and reached by beaten pathways, exceedingly difficult to walk through. Professor Moseley thus describes a rookery. "At first you try to avoid the nests, but soon you find that impossible. Then, maddened almost by the pain, for they bite furiously at the legs, stench, and noise, you have recourse to brutality. Thump, thump goes your stick, and at each blow down goes a bird. Thud, thud you hear from the men behind you as they kick the birds right and left off the nests. And so you go for a bit. Thump, smash, whack, thud, caw, and the path behind you is strewn with the dead and dying and bleeding. Of course it is horribly cruel thus to kill whole families of innocent birds, but it is absolutely necessary. One must cross the rookeries in order to explore the island at all, and collect the plants or survey the coasts from the heights." Penguins feed principally on crustacea, mollusks, shellfish, and small fish, varied with a little vegetable matter. Although the legs are very short, penguins yet walk with ease, and can, on occasion, run with considerable speed. It would appear, however, as if the largest of the tribe, the emperor penguin, had become somewhat too bulky to run. For when speed is necessary, it lies down upon the snow and propels itself with its feet, traveling, it is said, in this manner with incredible speed. Penguins, though confined to the southern hemisphere, enjoy a wide range in every variety of climate. They are found on the Antarctic ice, on the shores of South Africa, South America, Australia, New Zealand, and inhabit many islands of the southern seas, notably the Falklands, Kerguelen, and Tristan da Cunha. In size, penguins vary greatly. The largest is the emperor penguin of the Antarctic seas. Scarcely smaller is the king penguin of Kerguelen Island. The emperor penguin stands some 3.5 feet high and may weigh as much as 78 pounds. The gentle penguin, or Johnny of the sailors, is next in size, but being little smaller than the king penguin. This species inhabits Kerguelen Island and the Falklands. The crested penguins, or rockhoppers, of which there are several species, are much smaller. They occur in the Falkland Islands, New Zealand, and the Antarctic. The South African form is known as the black-footed penguin. Its nearest allies are Humboldt's penguin of western South America and the jackass penguin of the Falklands. The smallest of all is the little blue penguin of South Australia and New Zealand, standing only 17 inches high. The tube-nosed birds. Until recently, these birds were believed to be closely related to the gulls, but it is now generally agreed that they are really distant relatives of the divers and penguins. The association with the gulls was pardonable, for they certainly bear superficial resemblance to them. The birds now under discussion may be readily distinguished from the gulls by the fact that the nostrils open into a tube on the top of the beak, or a pair of tubes, one on either side, hence the name of the group. Like the gulls, they are seabirds and web-footed. Their young are downy and for a time helpless. One egg is laid, which is white and in some cases spotted with red at the large end. As a rule, no nest is made, but the egg laid on bare ground in a hole or burrow or in crevices of rocks. The albatrosses build a nest of earth, tufts of grass and moss, the whole structure raising the sitting bird well above the ground. The giant and fulmar petrels also build nests. The albatross is said by Professor Moseley to hold the egg in a pouch while sitting, as in the case of the king penguin. The nature of this pouch has never been described. Although occurring in the seas of all parts of the world, the southern hemisphere must be regarded as their headquarters, since here the greatest number of species are found. All are carnivorous, and, with the exception of one small group, the diving petrels of the Strait of Magellan, are birds of powerful flight. A large number of species belong to this group, but an enumeration of all would be wearisome. A few of the more striking have, therefore, been selected for description. The albatrosses. It was an albatross which brought such woe upon the ancient mariner whose pitiful story is so feelingly told by Coleridge. But the tables are occasionally turned, for men falling overboard in southern seas are liable to be attacked by these powerful giants. The albatross is mostly renowned for its majestic flight. Mr. Froude has given us a wonderful description of this flight, which is quoted with approval by Professor Newton. It runs as follows. The albatross wheels in circles round and forever round the ship, now far behind, now sweeping past in a long, rapid curve, like a perfect skater on an untouched field of ice. There is no effort. Watch as closely as you will, you rarely or never see a stroke of the mighty pinion. The flight is generally near the water, often close to it. You lose sight of the bird as he disappears in the hollow between the waves, and catch him again as he rises over the crest. But how he rises and whence comes the propelling force is to the eye inexplicable. He alters merely the angle at which the wings are inclined. Usually they are parallel to the water and horizontal, but when he turns to ascend or makes a change in his direction, the wings then point at an angle, one to the sky, the other to the water. Professor Hutton, speaking with similar enthusiasm of the wonderful flight, gives us, however, another side to the picture. Suddenly, he says, he sees something floating on the water, and prepares to alight. But how changed he now is from the noble bird but a moment before, all grace and symmetry. He raises his wings, his head goes back, and his back goes in. Down drop two enormous webbed feet, straddled out to their full extent, and with a hoarse croak between the cry of a raven and that of a sheep, he falls souse into the water. Here he is at home again, breasting the waves like a cork. Presently he stretches out his neck, and with great exertion of his wings runs along the top of the water for 70 or 80 yards, until at last, having got sufficient impetus, he tucks up his legs and is once more fairly launched in the air. For the wonderful photographs of the albatross at home, we are indebted to the Honorable Walter Rothschild. They are from his book on the avifauna of Laysan Island in the North Pacific. Unfortunately for the albatrosses and other birds, traders have been attracted to Laysan for the sake of the guano deposits. The birds were strictly protected during the occupation of Mr. Preece, but when he left they had no friend to shield them, and their eggs were taken in cartloads, as the accompanying photograph shows. When an albatross makes love, Professor Moseley tells us he stands by the female on the nest, raises his wings, spreads his tail and elevates it, throws up his head with the bill in the air or stretches it straight out forwards as far as he can, and then utters a curious cry. Whilst uttering the cry, the bird sways his neck up and down. The female responds with a similar note, and they bring the tips of their bills lovingly together. This sort of thing goes on for half an hour or so at a time. There are several different kinds of albatross. The largest measures over 11 feet across the outstretched wings. They are inhabitants of the southern seas. After the albatrosses, the largest bird of the group is the giant petrel. Sailors call it breakbones, Nelly, or stinker. In habits, it differs much from its aristocratic relative the albatross, haunting the coasts in search of dead seals and whales and the bodies of other birds. Professor Moseley aptly likens it to the vulture. It soars all day along the coast, on the lookout for food. No sooner is an animal killed than numbers appear as if by magic, and the birds are evidently well acquainted with the usual proceedings of sealers, who kill the sea elephant, take off the skin and blubber and leave the carcass. The birds gorge themselves with food just like the vultures, and are then unable to fly. I came across half a dozen at Christmas Harbor in this condition. We landed just opposite them. They began to run to get out of the way. The men chased them. They ran off, spreading their wings but unable to rise. Some struggled into the water and swam away, but two went running on, gradually disgorging their food in the utmost hurry until they were able to rise, when they made off to sea. The Fulmar petrel is a British bird. On St. Kilda, Professor Newton tells us, from 18,000 to 20,000 young are killed in 1 week in August, the only time when, by the custom of the community, they are allowed to be taken. These, after the oil is extracted, serve the islanders for winter food. The storm petrel is a small bird which breeds abundantly in St. Kilda and the Orkneys, and so fearless that it will allow itself to be taken from the nest by hand. Immediately this is done, the bird vomits a quantity of pure oil from its mouth. The wild fowlers make use of this habit, capturing the bird, collecting the oil, and setting the prisoner free again. The story is related of a storm petrel which was kept in a cage for 3 weeks. It was fed by smearing its breast with oil, which the bird swallowed by drawing the feathers separately through its beak. These birds are popularly supposed to be seen only before stormy weather, and therefore are not welcomed by sailors, who call them devil's birds and witches. This bird seems to commend itself to some palates. Thus the late Mr. Seabohm says, "Cooked on toast like snipe, we found them delicious eating, very rich, but not at all fishy." We cannot refrain from a brief mention of the remarkable little diving petrel. Remarkable because of its unlikeness to all the other petrels and its strong resemblance to the ox. But its tubular nostrils and certain anatomical characters proclaim its true affinities. This is a petrel, says Professor Moseley, that has given up the active aerial habits of its allies and has taken to diving, and has become specially modified by natural selection to suit it for this changed habit, though still a petrel in essential structure. On 2 occasions, Professor Moseley met with them in the Strait of Magellan, and describes the water as being covered with these birds in flocks extending over acres, which were made black with them. End of section 6. Habit. 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 For this changed habit. For this changed habit.